Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Lion's Den. In today's show, we speak with Evan Mestman, who is the founder of ProAttitudes. Now, Evan is a health expert, and his company, ProAttitudes, is all about helping people who have really dedicated a lot of their time and energy to their career pursuits, and they sort of left their health behind. That could be physical, it could be mental, it could be spiritual. Evan taps into all of those things and helps you to unlock and refocus on your health, which ultimately ends up facilitating even more success in your career, paradoxically. So it's really interesting conversation with Evan. He's a really cool guy. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Evan, welcome to the Lion's Den.
Hey, I'm grateful for you inviting me. Thank you, Nico.
Of course, of course. So let's dive in. I was on your LinkedIn page earlier and just kind of getting an idea for your career path, as I like to do. And I want to review it with you right now. And I want to go all the way back to 1990, which is the first thing that I see on your LinkedIn page. Maybe we'll have to go even further back, but that's the first thing I see when you founded Appetite and Attitudes, which you ran for about 12 years. So what was that business? Tell me about that.
Wow, I'm impressed. You're the first person who's ever mentioned. That was my first private practice. It was my dream job. I had gotten out of school and started working at a hospital as a dietitian. And across the street from the hospital was a health club. And I had gotten during my master's, getting my master's in clinical nutrition, I had worked as a private personal trainer, and I was an assistant manager in a health club. So, I never had to pay for a gym membership. So I saw this gym across the street, and I said, well, maybe I don't have to. After like a few months of working in the hospital, I said, okay, I got to get back to doing what I preach. And I went over there and I did a tour, and I told the manager, I said, listen, you got this office upstairs that's filled with boxes and it's just junk in here. If you clean that out, I could do free nutrition consults for every one of you new members, and that could be my office. And that was the beginning of Appetite and Attitudes. But nobody can spell Appetite and Attitudes. So when I had an online presence, when I came back to this, and that was my first job or my first career, because I really did believe back then that it's not just about nutrition. It's about your appetite, which is up here, and your attitude. So that's the long story to a short answer. So that and I was there for 12 years, loving it. It got me. It springboarded me to everything else that I'm doing today.
Okay, awesome. So let's go maybe even a step farther back, which you just sort of hinted at, which was working in the hospital. So what were you doing in the hospital, and did that inform you and teach you and get you ready for starting Appetites and Attitudes?
So it's a good question. I would say no, it was an outlet for me, because I didn't just want to work being stifled by what I would call sick care, not well care. I learned very quickly that being in healthcare is not healthcare, it's sick care. And I came from a holistic background. My father was a dentist, but very much, I called him a tooth chiropractor. Into every vitamin pill there was out there, and all these crazy exercise programs and meditation and mindfulness. My mom would go on a diet every Monday. I just knew that both of them, the way that they approached it, was not what I wanted to do. And as a kid, I was very sickly. So I woke up one day and realized, after being bullied long enough, being called heavy, I just looked in the mirror and said, nobody's coming to save me. I've got to do this myself. And I started changing my habits one at a time over a summer, and it led to a transformation. And that transformation is something I've been kind of reverse engineering ever since. And I decided to go to school, went pre-med, but then said, this is not for me. But when I took my last semester in college, a course in nutrition that wasn't even toward my major, and I said, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And I scrambled to find a master's program. It was what I would call very traditional. I wanted to learn all there was to learn, but I had learned a lot of holistic and alternative medicine. I used to drive my teachers crazy, but I wanted to learn both. And I also wanted to learn the wellness aspect of it, which was the fitness part, working in a health club, but the fitness. And then I wanted to understand chronic illness, which is the diabetes and heart disease and obesity too, which back then we didn't really understand. It wasn't nearly as what it is now. And then I even worked in critical care. It was one of the things I loved doing. I became a certified nutrition support dietitian, working and helping people survive critical illness. All of that put together because I have this thirst to understand why do we do this? Why does this happen? And I'm constantly looking for the pieces of the puzzle, but school didn't give me everything. So, you were asking me, like, I was in the hospital. I realized all the schooling I had, 7 years of schooling, wasn't enough. I had to go learn more. So it was a foundation. I would call it enough to keep me curious. And that's
Yeah.
another reason why I started the private practice, which even then I'm like, when I think back now, I was like, gosh, I didn't know enough, but I knew enough to help people. I knew more than they did. And now I know
Yeah.
so much more.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. So I mean, I guess it is reminiscent to a lot of people's start of their career, I would say, where you had this like topic, this thing you wanted to chase down, which was health, let's say, as broadly as possible. You were really interested
I
in,
can give you the reason was that as I was growing up,
yeah.
not only was I sickly, but every one of my family members was dying from heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And I just remember, and obesity. I just remember me having this discussion with myself. I don't want to end up like them. And when my grandmother passed from heart disease and I was 13, I remember it was an existential moment for me. Like, what am I going to do? How do I protect myself from something like that? From also, the love that was there, and now it's, we're severed. How do you deal with all of this? And that, I think, cinched it, that I needed to find a path forward that gave me hope that it wasn't going to end up that way. Now, is it? I think that we can control the controllables. I think that's what ProAttitudes is all about. You can't control your circumstances, but you absolutely can control your perspective.
Got it. Okay. So you go to school to start learning about this stuff. You work in the hospital to start learning about it in even more depth. And then you start Appetite and Attitudes. You got your own business going. You sort of bootstrapped it. You got an office in the gym nearby. That's an awesome story to get that up and running. You did that for 12 years. And then at some point, and again, I'm on your LinkedIn here, it looks like you scrapped it and went corporate. Am I getting that right?
No, I wouldn't say scrapped it. I would
Okay.
say pivot. I use the word pivot. I have about 7
Okay.
pivots in my life. Well, what
Mhm.
happened was, because I was in this really great facility and this great opportunity, it was the best lead magnet I ever had. That really fed me, and I kind of took it for granted. But man, back then, having a free nutrition consult. But I learned then too that it was about relationships, and it was about solving people's problems. So I know that part of the challenge was that people were having problems, not just in one-on-one, but corporations were having problems too with helping their employees take better care of themselves. Diabetes is on the rise, obesity is on the rise, heart disease. That's what I did my master's thesis in, was heart disease and cardiac rehab. And so I went around to different companies like ADP, Turner Broadcasting System, Estee Lauder, and I did back then it was called New Attitudes. That was my nutrition wellness program. And I got recruited by a startup. And that startup gave me hope that now I could take my program and I could help the masses. So instead of helping just hundreds of people, I could help tens of thousands, because they were targeting companies. It was a wellness company delivered via the internet, well ahead of its time. Back in this was back 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001. And we were targeting these self-insured companies. So this was before the Affordable Care Act and all the thing. Everything just completely changed with the Clintons coming and trying to fix healthcare and then abandoning it, and then it just kind of fell apart. And insurance companies said, "Okay, we're coming in, and we're going to make lots of money on this." And we went public on 9/11/2001 at Cantor Fitzgerald. So we went from being a hero to zero. I mean,
Wow.
had 500,000 founder shares that were worth zero.
You literally went public on 9/11.
We were going to go. We had Cantor Fitzgerald. We had the meeting at 11 o'clock that morning.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Very frustrating, yeah, to say the least. But I had to pivot because I needed to make money for my new family. I was married. I had a young kid born in 1997. So it was like, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to go back to private practice where I was successful? I had 40 patients that I was clients that I was seeing a week. I had other programs, but being an entrepreneur is very different than working with a company. So I was a diabetes educator, certified diabetes educator. I pivoted into selling insulin pumps. I found a pathway because I was a certified insulin pump trainer, and somebody there gave me an opportunity, and that's how I got into corporate America. And I went from sales to management to leadership in different companies. I started with Desatronic, which turned into Roche. Funny story there. They were a Swiss company. They did not listen to the FDA about their manufacturing processes. And by the time I had been working there only about less than a year, they were told when Roche bought them, they could no longer import insulin pumps. So an FDA recall. Going through that, like learning, going, hey, the sales process is very much like the therapeutic coaching process, counseling process, problem solving. So I really loved that. I felt like I was an expert in sales, but then I went in and I worked for KCI, which now is owned by 3M. And I worked in wound care, but I kept my RD along the way, but I learned how to work with teams. I got into management, became a manager, and also corporate accounts. And then I got recruited for leadership at another company for being a regional sales manager. But then I built a national clinical team, which was an amazing experience. And I was a national clinical manager at another company, Convatec. And what I learned is that corporations suck the joy out of almost everything you do.
Yeah.
It wasn't for that it was intentional. I think that it's because it's human nature to fall back into the comfort zone. And I think that was the awakening for me, that when the opportunity came for me to go back to doing what I love to do, it wasn't by choice. It was by necessity, because COVID made it so that it was impossible for me to go back into corporate America. And I went up into the attic and found everything that I've been working on over 20 years ago, because I'd put it all together and left it. And I
a lot of the appetite and attitudes,
as
stuff?
well as the work that I did for the startup. I'd worked with 20 consultants. One of my consultants was Elon Musk's mom, May Musk. And I got to listen to the stories about Elon being, playboy, and would he settle down? But at least he's going to give me grandkids. It was amazing. Having that opportunity. May Musk is an amazing woman. She happens to be an RD, and she helped along with 20 other consultants. I was VP of product services. So I had all of the logic that we'd created. We were taking analog information and creating a digital program, wellness program. Well, all of that I had collected, but all of the code disappeared with going bankrupt. So it just sat there doing nothing. And I decided after 20 years, I said, hey, okay, I'm going to go up into the attic. I cleaned it up, found it, said, really, what really spurred me is I opened up and I saw a recommendation that someone had given to me who was my mentor. And I read it and I'm like, who is that person? I had forgotten who I was. And that was a rude awakening. And then I read a quote from one of the advertisements that we had about me saying, I help people find their why when it comes to nutrition. And in my head, I just read Simon Sinek's work and said, I'm the Simon Sinek of nutrition. What are you doing sitting on this? And I sat in my basement and I put together from the ground up. I said, okay, we're going to do this a smart way with all the experience that I had. And I started building ProAttitudes.
Wow. So yeah. And I think that we hear this spoken about kind of like vaguely, like COVID happened, people were forced to be at home. Then there was this giant startup of, this giant like craze of new businesses being founded because of, I think, stories just like the one you're telling. It was like people couldn't go back to their job for a little bit. And so they had a moment to just think about things to themselves, go through old boxes, sit in their basement, and all these new businesses were formed. So So, okay, 2020, you launched ProAttitudes. You got all
Mhm.
this information dating back, for a very long time. So it's not really a new idea or a new practice, let's say. It's just a new entity, and you're taking all of these old learnings and you're pulling it in, applying new things. Okay, so ProAttitudes. So what do you guys do, and who is it for? Who do you help?
Great question. So, what do? I work with business owners and leaders who've climbed the ladder to success and they left their health on the bottom rung. What I do is I go back to that bottom rung, help bring them back up to the top rung so they don't fall off the ladder altogether. 690,000 people die from heart disease every year. It's the number one killer in the world, number one killer in the United States. But for nearly half of them, do you know what the first symptom is?
Stress.
Okay,
They're tired.
nobody gets it. Nobody gets it right. Sudden death. They don't get
That's
it from
the first
chance.
symptom.
That's the first symptom, just sudden death. And to
Wow.
me, it's not just a heart attack, right? We're talking about heart disease, so it could be anything, right? Stroke. It could be. It could also be just blood clots. It could be arrhythmias. There are so many things that we don't understand about the heart. Well, to me, I need to give those people a second chance. So I do it three different ways. I help people lose weight with their mind, not their mouth. What I mean by that is the weight on their shoulder, not just the weight around their middle. Because I do
Okay.
believe that attitude, obviously, ProAttitude has the huge impact on people's health. I help them be intentional with their health. My program's called Intentional Health. And lastly, I help quiet or silence their inner critic. The one voice we hear more than any voice is the voice that's in our head. And usually they're lies. And we ruminate on this negativity all day long. What I do is I help silence that and I help develop. That's why Yoda's sitting up here next to my inner critic. Here's Darth Vader. There's Yoda is the inner coach. I developed their inner coach. And I feel very well positioned for this because I spent 20 years in corporate America working in sales management leadership, seeing what happens with corporate culture when you're not focusing on the private victories that employees need in order to have public victories for the company.
Yeah. And I want to dig into each of those three things that you just shared. But first, I had a question, which is during your 16 years in the corporate world or whatever it is, 16, 20 years, and you being someone with such a strong health background and a lot of the knowledge around this, did you also experience yourself becoming less healthy, even with all of the, ammo that you had going into it? Even you felt it.
I think that it was not so much on the physical side because I was
Mhm.
able, I always was the one who was in the gym
Mhm.
first thing in the morning. I was a healthy eater. Everyone knew it. Everyone always asked me, "Oh, nutrition advice." They all knew I came from a nutrition background, but it was more the attitude perspective. Um,
Yeah.
Part of that was how do you silence that inner critic? I had a very strong inner critic, and it had to do with the traumas that I'd been through as a child. That you just sometimes people don't realize it can be the smallest slight, but we live in our lives right now based on our experience, and that experience is filtered through that lens of when you're a child, you need to survive. We're human beings, right? So we need to survive and procreate. We're going to do whatever we need for survival. But I believe that we're spiritual beings having a human existence, and that the duality between living in our comfort zone, because we're hardwired for that as a human. And I think that that part of us that strives for purpose is hardwired for growth. That duality of the two leads to the existence that we have. That I think that's what our purpose is to work through that. And
Mhm.
that was the thing that came to me during the 20 years of working in corporate America, that it's not just about the paycheck, it's not just about the goals and objectives of the company. What about my life, my meaning, my family, and the things that were truly important to me, and how do I not compartmentalize it, but how do I integrate it? Yeah. So during that time, it was more of I was the fish in the fishbowl,
Yeah. Hmm.
not knowing. And then suddenly it has become now fodder for me for when I do my presentations, because live, eat, and breathe it.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so quiet your inner critic. I want to talk a little bit more about that because I was on your website earlier and I was clicking on some links and I found myself on a quiz that you had linked to, and I didn't take the quiz, but I just kind of read the summary. I want to take it later, but I read the summary. It seems like there are some number of different types of inner critic. Can you like mention a couple of those? What
Sure.
are those?
So my inner critic, there are 10 that I've
Okay.
created, and they're just layers of your identity. I think it's more, there's not like only 10. It's the
Hmm.
10 that I've identified. And part of this is understanding that we have layers of our identity, and they present themselves as inner critics. For
Okay.
instance, when I was a child, maybe 4 or 5, went to preschool. First day, I remember driving. Now I remember this, right? So you remember being 4 or 5, maybe, but this memory of driving with my mom and going, "Oh, she's not going to leave me there." And we get there, and she's going to leave me there, and I have a tantrum, and I'm so focused on not letting her go that I don't see that she's gone. The car's gone. She's gone. It's like, so when you're a child like that, you don't have them. Right now, as an adult, I can process that, right? Understand it. But as a child, what do? You look at that and go, there must be something wrong with me that my mother left me here. I must have done something so bad that I deserved that. So you don't trust what you're thinking and feeling. So you come up with excuses that blame yourself. And that's how the inner critic gets created. I remember also working in the hospital, and I was in a burn unit, and there was this young kid screaming for his mom, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." I asked the nurse, I said, "Where's his mom? Why, you know?" And she said, "Oh, she won't be coming." I says, "Well, what's wrong?" She had tried to teach him a lesson by playing with the stove, so she poured boiling water on him. So the child can't look through the lens of my mother is a monster. Can't process that. There must be something so wrong with me. Now that's the extreme, right? That he's calling out to his mom because I'm sorry for what I must have done. There must be something terribly wrong. So imagine growing up with this belief system that's ingrained in you for survival, but it doesn't serve you anymore. That's where the inner critic is born. But because it doesn't serve you as an adult, part of what we need to do is to rewire that neural circuit. That's part of what that whole idea, to me, it was the inner critic I created because I know that the diseases today of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, obesity, autoimmune dysfunction are not just diseases of metabolism. I believe they're diseases of the neural pathways in our brain. And if we can change our belief systems or reframe them, change the way those neurons fire, which means they're going to wire differently, we can change that outcome and not just survive, but thrive. And that's really where the inner critic came from. And I have the perfectionist maestro because I had a dad who was very critical. It's either his way or no way. So my perfectionist maestro was definitely in there. I'm also a harmony enthusiast because I like to please people and I want to avoid conflict. So
Mm-hmm.
those are just two of the ones. There's also, I deal with a lot of leaders, so they have overdrive samurai. They're externally motivated by their wins instead of internally motivated. So they're always off to that next thing. So I put a little humor in it with the names.
Yeah.
But I also, when you take the quiz, you'll see the videos that explain it. And also you'll see things that you can do to help quiet the inner critic. But I also have a training called 21-day challenge to kind of silence that inner critic. And that really is very helpful for my clients.
Okay, got it. Okay, and it sounds like, I mean, each of the three inner critics that you mentioned seem like three things that they're sort of like, they drive you to act in a certain way. And of the three examples you gave, the way that it would drive you to act would be counter to your own health and happiness, it sounds like.
It would be based on what's happened in the past
Right.
and blame and shame, which is really part of the challenge with society today is we we do not know how to be vulnerable. So
Yeah.
instead of collaborating and reaching out and asking for help, we sit within our heads, this little, I call it a spicy meatball up here, or spicy meatloaf, that it's in there and it ruminates on the negativity because it keeps us safe. So it's meant for you to create self-awareness. The first tool in any change is self-awareness. So what kind of conversations do you have with yourself? And it depends on whether it's based in self-reliance, independence. Part of this is where the dialogue that you're having, is it self-defeating or is it effective? Are you being critical or are you being kind?
Yeah.
And that's really what's going to make the difference between staying stuck and helping you change for good.
Okay. So you mentioned two others. So quiet your inner critic, but also be intentional with your health and lose weight with your mind, not your mouth. When you start working with a new client, do you start with the inner critic and then move on to the next one? Or what order do you tend to do those three in?
So I always have somebody take a lifestyle challenge assessment when I start with my clients. So that looks at 7 key areas of your life. And it helps me because I created it based on the assessment that I had spent, an evidence-based assessment all those years ago. And then I updated it for myself, for what I needed for my clients. And what it does is it allows me to find 3 to 5 key things that bubble up to the top that I can see in really fast results with my clients, because typically there's just a few things that stand out that are the challenges that you have in your health or your lifestyle, that everything else kind of cascades from it. I have them take the inner critic quiz in the beginning so that we can identify it. That awareness is one of the first things we work on, self-awareness, and just being able to identify the inner critic in silence is a process that takes time. So
Yeah.
yes, but I also work, like, one of the things that I do is I work with a commitment log. It's
Okay.
all about accountability when it comes to this. It's not about me telling you what to eat, what to exercise, how to think. I could do those things, but part of this is I have a process. That process is the B3 way, and it's become, be strong, be grateful. So the beginning of my work with clients is to focus on the become, which is more self-awareness and acceptance. And once we have we build a customized approach for that person, because there's so many roads that lead to Rome. It's not like one, it's not cookie cutting.
Yeah.
Then we focus on the growth mindset, which is to be strong. How do you get disciplined? Discipline is a negative word for a lot of people, but discipline to me is the highest form of self-love. But a lot of people can't make commitments and keep them. So I say, okay, what's preventing that? And it's all connected to the inner critic, belief system. So we're working on it all as we progress forward. Once we have that identified, and we're working on building that self-awareness as well as self-acceptance, and we're building the attitude muscle. It's
Mm-hmm.
what I call it is developing your attitude muscle. It takes reps. You need reps to build muscle. Well, you need
Mm-hmm.
reps to build your attitude muscle. And as we get stronger, your commitments become greater than your compulsions. And the compulsions never go away. It's making deposits until all of a sudden you have dividends. Just like when you go to the bank to put your deposit, your check. Eventually, you're going to hopefully make more money than you spend. And that gives you the freedom to do what you want to do, travel, buy the things you want to buy, help the people you want to help, and live in a house that you love, and update it and do all the things that you want to do, right? Buy the food you want to buy. Money is a tool. It's freedom. Well, I look at it the same way. Make deposits in your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bank accounts, and you get dividends that give you the freedom to choose between stimulus and response. There's a space, right? And that's that freedom to choose. I help people develop that through that process. I hope
Got
that
it.
answers your question.
It does. It does. And I want to go back to one of the things that you said in there, which was, you mentioned toward the beginning of a process with a new client where you give them that sort of assessment of like 7 areas of their life, I think is what you said. Um, And you said generally you can sort of like boil their issue down to, 3 or 4 things that are kind of cascading down and negatively impacting everything else. So what are some examples of what those things could be? Because it seems like these are probably the challenges that people face, right?
Hmm.
These whatever these things are that you could boil it down to. So what are some examples?
That's a great question. So I haven't thought about that. So here's the thing. If we think about from a nutrition perspective, people will say they eat when they're not hungry.
Hmm.
So they're not self-aware of their internal cues. Their inner outer connection, they do not know how to relax, or they're busy but they don't feel productive. These are just some of the things.
Hmm.
um, they're when they look in the mirror, they hate what they say.
Okay.
Those are just some of the things that may, boil to the top. Exercise, I have no time for exercise. I'm afraid of change.
Mm.
um, I'd never really take the time out to enjoy the little things in life. I don't have time to notice little things. I've asked very interesting, specific questions that bring out what helps me identify the symptoms of the underlying issues.
Okay. And then, so for one of those that you mentioned, let's go with the I don't have time for the gym one.
Hmm.
So, in order to kind of treat that, let's say, do you? And I'm thinking about my own work. When I work with clients, and it's all about fixing something that's wrong with their business, we would identify issues, and then we would put a plan in place to get them where they want to go. But it would always start with very, very small baby steps to fix
Yes.
it. So is that what you? It's like, oh, you don't have time to go to the gym. Okay, I want you to do this. I want you to do 10 push-ups every morning.
even
How do you
even
start to treat it?
even smaller. So the first thing that I do is with anybody is we don't change anything, but
Hmm.
we just be a fly on the wall. The
Okay.
self-awareness. Show me, let me, I want to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling the next time and it's about making the commitments. I mean, when they make a commitment and they don't keep it, that's going to be very telling.
Hmm.
Makes no sense. Why would you not keep a commitment? And then you ask with discernment versus judgment. So many other people have programs and they have to follow it.
Hmm.
I think of Hard 75 or some of these personal trainers that some of my clients work with, and I'm thinking, wait a second, you're going to kill my client. But it's not a should or shouldn't. It's about, well, what's getting in the way? For instance, I don't have the time to exercise. Okay, so we make a very tiny commitment. What time of the day can you exercise? Not when you should, but when can you? Okay, when I first get up in the morning. Great. So we'll make a commitment for, well, how many minutes can you commit to exercise? Oh, I can do 20, 30. I said, no, I need smaller. Smaller? How about 10? I said, no, I want smaller. Okay, how about 5? I said, can you give me 5? Yeah, I should be able to give you 5. I said, 5. Now, this is a commitment. Now, commitments mean you're making it regardless of whether you want to or not. It's not about motivation. I have a training
Yeah.
program called Bypassing Motivation to Jumpstart Your Life, because motivation is fickle. It's not about motivation, it's about discipline, and it's about making that commitment to the exercise by saying yes to yourself instead of no. How many times what are you saying no to when you're saying yes to that 5 minutes? So I'll ask them that, have
Mm-hmm.
that discussion. So 50% of change can happen if you imagine dealing with the challenge ahead of time. That's not my statistic, that's science. BJ Fogg has done the research on it. I love that. So I always work on impending challenges. I'll work on what are your victories, because to me, you're opening up the neural pathways to success. Then we'll talk about impending challenges, because those neural pathways will be open while you've just talked about victories. And then I talk about problems. How many times do people get on the phone and go, or they're in the call and they're like, oh, I had such a bad week. I said, no, let's start with your wins. They don't understand the intention of it,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the purpose of that. And it really makes a difference. Especially then they'll have a lot more ammunition at the end if they've opened up those neural pathways for success to deal with those, and they might, with the problems, they'll probably already have solutions to the problems. So it's got to be really tiny, 5 minutes or less, has to be specific, measurable, action oriented, realistic, trackable. It also has to be enjoyable and rewarding. So I call that's a smarter rule, not smart rules, but smarter rule. And when I use that, that's part of it's all built into this. They're writing it down, and then they come back the next week and we talk about what were they successful with. Well, I did it 2 or 3 times. I even have clients that used to go to the gym and they're not doing it anymore. I'll say, okay, all I want you to do is to pick a time of the day. You're going to go drive there. You do not have to go in. That's graving. It's the heart. And now what you're doing is creating the neural pathway for going to the gym. When you go, do you travel to the gym or do you work out at home?
When I do cardio, it's just outside. But when I lift, there's a gym nearby. It's a nice little walk away. I like to live very close to a gym.
That's great. Well, when you think about your workouts, like it's more of about getting in the habit of getting to go to the gym. But once you get there, it's almost like rote.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And people don't have that. So part of it is I break it down into very, very easy, discernible steps. And I listen to what's going on up here and we reframe.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because part of the reason why I like to live so close to a gym now is because I've experienced in my past, I would make excuses. I don't want to go there. It's too far away. And you're so right. It is just hard to get there sometimes. So, okay. So the neural pathway thing you're talking about, it's all about like over time, by being more mindful and by making those small commitments at first, you end up building habits, and then your habits can kind of continue to carry you through from then on, because at that point they're habitual.
Exactly. It's a system. Though right now, I love James Clear. He said we all aspire to our goals, right? But we fall to the level of our systems. We rarely do, and that's why I'm not big on goal setting. I really like to have big, hairy, audacious goals, and then I like to have commitments where I'll sit down and go, okay, or we break it into objectives and then small, tiny steps, however you want to word it. But so many people are focused on goals. Goals are about outcomes. Okay, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, or I'm going to get in shape for, a race. Well, what happens after the race? This is the infinite game, right? So, I trained for a marathon. I'm not training that way anymore. I did it, ran the New York City Marathon. It was an amazing experience. But what if I had changed my mind about not just even the system, but then I changed my identity to say, I'm a marathoner. Yeah. I would then pick up which I see happen with people who do this. But part of this is working on the system with people. If you have the system, then I create the identity of being somebody who exercises. Like, I'm a healthy business owner who takes really good care of my health, versus I'm just going to go exercise. It's a very different paradigm.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. All right. Well, I want to wrap up here because we're coming on 40 minutes, but I wanted to mention one more thing for our listeners. And you had told me about this last time we chatted. And I thought that it was just it really hits home, the fact that you are like very passionate about health. Do you want to tell me again about the gardening project that you've done?
So that's funny. Okay. So in my town, in my village, we have a beautiful village, and it has a park. And in that park, it's over 100 years old, and it was dilapidated. And one of the things that I love to garden, and I saw this, I like doing service projects. So I went to the town and said, this is a really beautiful park. It has great bones. I think a lot of people will come here. Can we want to take on this as volunteers, because there are beautiful gardens around the country, around the world, that are run by up to 75% volunteers. So that was my goals. Like, when you look at Longwood Gardens, I was really amazed at that. So that was what kind of motivated me to go to them and ask. So I took on this plot of land that was completely covered in weeds. Probably most people would never want to garden there because there are a lot of trees and roots, and you couldn't plant anything in it. And I just said, listen, we're going to take it on. It's 7 years now that we've been doing it. But what happened is we planted the seed, literally. So now we're taking better care of this. As we're there, people are like, wow, thank you. This is beautiful. What is this? Are you work with the town? I tell them, no, this is the Amity Garden of Heckscher Park. We have a Facebook group you can join for free. And it's meant for people who love gardening and love Huntington. And that was really to bring people together. That's my passion. I think of gardening as my palette. I'm an artist. My son is actually an artist. That's his art in the back, Generation Drop. But my thing is I express my art through my gardening. And so my front yard has no lawn. And I find that gardening is very similar to really business. That, when you have a garden, there are some things you plant that just take off. And then there are other things that flounder that if you don't transplant them, they're going to die. And then the weeds, you got to keep up on the weeds. And so many people don't have a system. So with gardening, I have a system. And it takes me 5 to 15 minutes a day, and that's it. And you can beautify your world, be mindful, and make the world a better place.
I mean, there's so many parallels from this to the work that you do at ProAttitudes, I mean, just helping people to flourish, right? And it's funny, the story you just told about going to the whatever Parks and Rec or the city, whoever you ended up having to talk to. It's the same thing you did with that gym all those years ago with Attitude and
Appetite and Attitude.
Yeah. Appetite and Attitudes. It's just like you saw something, you're like, this could be better. And you go talk to them and you say, hey, I can make this better if you let me. And I just think it's so cool. I would have just walked by the garden. I would have just walked by it every time and thought, this is ugly. Why doesn't the city do something? And you did something. That's awesome.
Well, what's really nice about doing something like that in your neighborhood, which I encourage everyone to do, like when you walk by somebody, say hello. It is amazing the energy that it instills. They put in new fences. They just put $1 million into a whole new playground. They have a new watering system. They planted all new gardens. Now it's a destination. We have a Harry Chapin stage where people come and present and have performances every night for free in the park. I mean, the park has really transformed. It was great before. I didn't do it. All I did was plant a seed, and it took.
Yeah. But
is that what it's about?
It's awesome too, because it's like instead of going to your town hall events and voting and saying, hey, let's clean up the park, that should be an issue. You just cleaned up the park, and then from there, the city knew, they understood, oh, wow, I guess our citizens really care about this. And so more and more investment has gone into it. I think that's so cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a labor of love, but I'll tell you, when you now reach out to the town, and like I went on vacation and part of the watering system was broken because I came back, it was hot and some of the plants had looked dead. I reached out. He like immediately came. We went down, sent the plumber down, fixed it. I'm like, okay, I've got some connections now. Maybe we can make even more things happen.
Awesome. All right, cool. So, Evan, you are the master of all things health and flourishing. If people want to take the first step to learn more about ProAttitudes, your frameworks and methodologies, where should they go?
I made it easy. So proattitudes.com/follow. Okay. Well, it's my link tree, and it has, if they want to make an appointment with me, they can take the inner critic quiz. They can take even the lifestyle challenge assessment. They can sign up for my newsletter on LinkedIn. All of those things. They can join my Facebook group. They can follow me on TikTok, on Instagram, on any of the channels that I'm on. So yeah, it's all there. Perfect. One place.
Perfect. I love it. We will link to that in the notes, and highly recommend everybody goes on there, take one of those quizzes, learn about your inner critic. And Evan, thank you for joining us in the Lion's Den.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful.